This panel is, we have some 4 very esteemed panelists here. I'm very delighted to introduce Susan Gregurick, Mona Singh, Tammy Toscos, and Andy Kilianski. And so I think that the best thing is to leave the time to them. So I'm going to do that. We're going to do a round of opening statements, whatever they want to say, about 5 minutes apiece. And then they're going to ask each other questions, and then you're going to ask them questions. So that's the run of the show. So with that, I'm going to ask each of them to take less than 1 minute apiece to tell us enough about their role so that you have context for their remarks, so you know, like, where they're coming from, what they do. So, Susan, if you would start us off. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Susan Gregurick. I'm the Associate Director of Data Science at the National Institutes of Health, and my role is to coordinate and catalyze data science and computing and related technologies across our 27 institute centers and offices, and I like to say that I am the herder of cats.
Hi, I'm Mona Singh. I'm a professor of computer science at Princeton University. I am in the Department of Computer Science, the Louis Sigler Institute for Integrative Genomics, and in the newly formed Princeton Precision Health. So I lead mainly a computational biology group, and we work broadly in computational biology, but have a big effort as well in cancer genomics.
Good afternoon. I'm Tammy Toscos, and I'm a computer scientist who specializes in HCI, and I'm a health services researcher. I started a health services research unit at a non-for-profit health system in Northeast Indiana 11 years ago, and I have about 35 people that work for me now on a variety of health-related projects.
Hi, afternoon, everybody. I'm Andy Kilianski. I'm a program manager at the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health. We're a new agency within the U.S. government in the Department of Health and Human Services, and our job is to take some of those cool discoveries that you saw from DARPA and really take those high-risk, high-reward types of bets for healthcare outcome improvement. My portfolio is focused mostly on predictive computational tools to make biomedical discovery and translation more predictable.
Excellent. Great. Well, thank you very much. So now you know who these folks are. I'm going to ask them to tell you more about their work. So I think we'll keep going in the same order, if that's okay. And Susan, you have the clicker.
Thank you so much again. I just want to talk a little bit about some of the things I'm seeing in computing and computer science in my role at the National Institutes of Health. So first, and this is just a very brief overview of our institutes and our mission. Of course, our core strategies for discovery. We want to create discoveries and innovative research strategies that really have an application to improve health for the U.S. population. We fund a number of resources to renew our scientific, human, and physical capabilities and to basically prevent disease. We have an expanded amount of work on knowledge and knowledge-based generation, both in the medical and the associated basic sciences. And finally, a goal in scientific integrity to promote the highest level of scientific integrity and public accountability in the health science research fields. So, I don't know if you know this or not, but the NIH is probably one of the largest generators of public health data and information. We have well over 352 petabytes of data in the cloud available for you, the research community. Half of that is in open science data, and the other half is in what we would call controlled science. That's data about people. That's your genomics, your metagenomics, all of the stuff that's collected in the clinical care and the clinical trials. And most of this is made available to researchers through a partnership with Google, with AWS, and with Microsoft. And thank you, by the way, for those partnerships. We provide computing, data storage. We provide services, platforms, workbenches, new capabilities in AI, both for ourselves and our intramural research community, as well as for the extramural research community. So if you're even thinking about NIH and an NIH grant, these capabilities are available to you. And this is our STRIDES partnership. So I just want to highlight that. We do have a footprint in computational sciences, but it's much more of a partnership footprint. And you're going to hear this throughout my short talk. It's always about partnering with other agencies or partnering with industry to provide computing capabilities for our researchers. I want to talk just very briefly, and I'm going to shout out to Bill here, about the NARE, the National AI Research Resource pilots. We've partnered with NSF and with other agencies to really promote the National AI Research Resources. We are the co-leads with the Department of Energy on what's called NAIR Secure. This is how you would compute on health data in the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. So we are partnering with them. And you'll see 3 of our large projects here. The first one is generation of synthetic real-world data. So computing on electronic healthcare data at scale, where those data are held privately, are very hard. So creating new synthetic data for those and then putting them at Oak Ridge for computational capabilities is one of our projects. We're also democratizing AI for cancer with privacy-preserving synthetic data. Just recently, the Oak Ridge National Lab and the National Cancer Institute published a paper on how you can actually do large language models for the ePath reports. Your pathology reports and your electronic healthcare reports are not coexistent. It is very hard to get your path reports to your electronic healthcare records and get those to the cancer surveillance registries. But the path reports are what tell you that you have early onset of cancer. And so any algorithms that we can link those data and do a computational analysis on those path reports and send them to the registries within a month or 2 is going to significantly impact our detection of cancer. I don't know if you know this, but it takes 2 years for us to get your path reports to the registries to signify that you have cancer, and that is way too long. So that's something that we've been working on. And then we're also working on essentially a chatbot using large language models to answer biological questions, and this was with my colleagues at NIH, the NCATS Institute, National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences, with the Department of Energy. So these are all Department of Energy partnerships, and the NAIR pilot is also with NSF and others. I just want to call it another impact statement on NAIR. I have a number of researchers who are emerging AI researchers of excellence, but they're often at small colleges and universities. One of my researchers is at the University of Washington in Tacoma. She was an assistant professor. We provided her funding to advance her computer science career in AI, and she recently won a NAIR award, and that's a very prestigious award for high-end computing at the National Lab. So I'm just really pleased that we're able to partner with NSF and others on this. And then my last slide today is to tell you that we are truly interested in computer science. You may not think so, but we actually do invest in it. It's pervasive across NIH, but these are always in partnership with other agencies, DOE, NSF. Here's an area that we are very interested in. We've run a number of ideation challenges to seed our biomedical researchers in the world of quantum computing. We're interested in quantum algorithms for biomedical research, interested in mathematical modeling for those hybrid accelerator quantum classical systems. Error correction and stability in quantum biomedical applications is another big area. And finally, techniques for quantum machine learning, QML. So these are just some of the things that we'd be really interested in with you. And finally, we have a lot of ways to go: hybrid computing, advancing new architectures, supporting efficient and shareable technologies across our platforms. We have well more than 300 platforms to support, harmonizing policies, and a robust connective data ecosystem. And so with that, I am going to pass it to the next person, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Take it away, Mona.
All right, I think I'll just give my little presentation from here. Okay, so I want to talk about the promise of precision oncology. So as I mentioned, I am a trained computer science and I'm in a computer science department among other affiliations. But I've been really interested in thinking about what computer science can do to advance healthcare, and in particular, to lead to better cancer treatments in the future. So what is this promise of precision oncology? So probably all of you know, an individual gets diagnosed with cancer. More than likely, in the past at least, they'd be treated either with chemotherapy or radiation. So this is a one-size-fits-all approach. But cancer is a highly heterogeneous disease where each case is like its own unique disease. And so the idea of precision oncology is that an individual with cancer would go to their doctor's office. Their cancer genomes would be sequenced, or maybe just a few of the important parts within their genomes would be sequenced. You'd put that together with their electronic medical health records. Maybe in the future, other types of data will be collected on them that is of a genomic nature. And you think also about their inherited genomes as well. And then computer algorithms would crunch through all this data, not just of the individual, but also in the context of data that's been collected across numerous other individuals, and ultimately would identify whether this person would benefit not from the one-size-fits-all approach, but maybe from a targeted treatment against some gene that is overactive in their cancer genomes. Or instead of having a targeted therapy in the form of a drug, maybe they're a candidate for these highly successful immunotherapies. So, that's really the dream. So why is this possible? So I personally think that there's a lot of room for computer scientists here, and that precision oncology is a place where computer scientists can really make a big difference. So why is this possible? Well, really, it's because there are diverse, complementary, and abundant data sources, and this is only kind of getting bigger as time goes on. So a lot of the source of this is the fact that genome sequencing now is very cheap. When the Human Genome Project got launched, to sequence that very first genome was like $2.7 billion. But now to sequence a genome, it's less than $1,000. All right, so people realize, cancer is a disease where our own cells acquire alterations that allow them to grow in an uncontrolled fashion. If we want to know what's going on with cancer, let's sequence these genomes. So the NIH and other organizations took part in these funded these large-scale consortia that resulted in genome sequencing or protein sequencing within the genomes of tens of thousands of individuals, and not just their genome sequencing, but also other types of multi-omic data that kind of give you an idea of the molecular underpinnings of cancer. And this data is available, as Susan was just talking about, through the NIH. Now, in addition to this, in basic science laboratories, people, we don't experiment on people. We experiment on cell lines. And so you can do all kinds of things to cell lines that can help us understand the molecular mechanisms of cancer. So, for example, for a cell line, we can remove a gene and see, does the cell live? And if it has impaired growth, we might think, hey, maybe a drug targeting this gene would help treat this particular kind of cancer that this cell line was derived from. And so we have abundant data on cell lines, both in kind of organized fashions in one place, but also, across laboratories across the country. And then finally, perhaps the biggest source of data is these electronic health records. And this is maybe the most challenging source of data to work with at present, but there's huge opportunities here. So there are more than 1 billion doctor visits a year in the United States. Most of the results that come from these visits are within electronic health records. A lot of this data is relating to cancer. So there are 18 million Americans living with a history of cancer. And just overall, the amount of electronic health records is just mind-boggling. So it's been estimated that globally it's 2.3 zettabytes of global health data. Okay, so just today, lots of people, including my group, look at the first two types of data sets. So for example, we've developed methods to try to identify genes that get activated when certain alterations occur within cancers, and then tie that together with cell line data to try to figure out which genes kind of work synergistically to suggest possible combinatorial drug treatments. But tying it in with this third source of data, these electronic health records, would be extremely powerful. Okay, so there's lots of data, but as we know, sitting in this room, and we've heard about this morning, that's not it. There's also this, huge thing going on right now in AI, and so we know that natural language processing has fundamentally changed within the last few years, and of course, that's going to allow us to look at these electronic health records in different ways, and their foundation models being trained just for that. But it's not just these models. So you can also, not just these natural language models, there are also now models that correspond to protein sequences, so protein language models that once trained allow you to do things like predict the impact of mutations in a zero-shot fashion. There are also these generative models that can look at all known drugs and try to generate new drugs. And then, of course, there's a huge space in the imaging world. So a lot of the data that exists is imaging data in cancer. And so there are these foundation models based on images as well, biomedical images. And this is just kind of the beginning of this line of research in this space. So I just wanted to mention a few challenges. I think there are lots of opportunities, and maybe these are things that we can talk about. And one really important thing is that cancer is heterogeneous, and so we actually have to understand things about the underlying biology to figure out what's going on and to really advance treatment. Even if we uncover potential cancer targets, we need drugs. So there are a limited number of drugs at present, but maybe these AI-powered drug discovery methods will be very helpful here. Another major issue, and I think it'll come up in the panel again, is that health data, although as I mentioned, it's so abundant, it's siloed across health systems, and we really need incentives and mechanisms to share this data. So computer scientists, we go where the data is, but if we have a tough time accessing the data, this is going to be really hard. There are also, of course, questions of patient privacy and consent, so we have to think about privacy-preserving computations. And then the last thing, which I think is super important, is we need, we all know about the power of AI, and, these models are based on data. And so it's really important to have these representative data sets, but we really need to think about how these data sets are if only certain people have access to healthcare.
Okay. Well, I'm going to talk more about how does this really work when humans try to use these applications in the context of taking care of your own health or as working within healthcare. And I like to talk about type 1 diabetes for a lot of reasons, but I think it's a really great example of how technology has impacted people's lives. Now, type 1 diabetes is a condition that's characterized by an autoimmune response that basically kills the beta cells in your pancreas, so you no longer produce insulin. And the age of onset is youth, so usually under 10 years old. And before 1920, there was no treatment. So people would just pass away from this condition because they couldn't use the glucose in their body. So at a cellular level, insulin is like a key that allows that glucose to be used. And so, but we can see that it's just not insulin, because if you just give yourself insulin, you don't know what impact that has on your blood sugar. It's related to what you eat. It's related to your growing. It's related to illness. Your blood glucose levels are controlled by a lot of factors. So the blood glucose meter, which came along in the 60s, was a really important component to helping people manage their disease. But when it came out, it was 3 pounds. So imagine a teenager carrying around a 3-pound device as they're trying to manage their disease while they go to high school. And so but it still improved. You look at that chart, you can see that a person with type 1 diabetes usually died within 25 years of diagnosis, right? It improved to 30% dying from within 25 years by 1950 because of insulin. And then with the introduction of technologies to test blood sugar with home glucose testing, it improved even better, with only 7% dying within 25 years of their diagnosis of type 1. But people with type 1 diabetes still are at higher risk to die earlier than other individuals. So along comes an insulin pump. So insulin is usually delivered through an injection, but the insulin pump allows it to be delivered into the interstitial fluid and a device that's worn on the body. But the first insulin pump that came out was the size of a backpack just in the 1980s. So that wasn't that long ago for me. Anyway, I'm an old person, but that seems like not that long ago. And then in a really short period of time, in 20 years' time, that insulin pump went from wearing a backpack to being something you can clip on your hip. Okay, so that is only due to computer scientists. It's actually what inspired me to go into the field of computer science. I was a healthcare provider, and I went back into my PhD much later in life, and it was because of this type of innovation. And I just think that all of you in the room are brilliant, and I want you to continue working on challenges like this. And just since 2020, we've seen a new technology evolving called continuous glucose monitoring. So instead of having to pierce your finger and test your blood with a glucometer, well, that no longer weighs 3 pounds. They are a few ounces, but still you have to carry it around with you. Now they have a device called a continuous glucose monitor, and it's shrunk in size. So this picture just shows how small they are. When they first came out, you couldn't wear them for very long, but now you can wear them up to a week, 10 days. And now we're seeing those used in other types of diabetes, like type 2 diabetes, which is much more prevalent in the United States and everywhere, but also even just for general wellness, because people kind of want to see, how does what I eat or how I exercise affect my blood sugar? And now more recently, we see that we have, so these CGMs, by the way, you have to inject them into your arm or your hip or your stomach, and it's kind of invasive because there's a tubing that goes in, but now they're developing CGMs that aren't invasive anymore. And so in some, I mean, this really, not only does this save lives, but it reduces complications from diabetes that are pretty dire, like blindness, amputations, heart disease. It also saves money. So diabetes in this country, type 2 especially, is extremely impactful on our economy. It's a very expensive disease to manage. So go computer science. That's what I say. However, I do have to mention that the number one confounder to the successful application of all the wonderful technologies that you all are building and are inspired to build is human behavior. And this is a small diagram that you can't read, but it just shows that health behavior is a complex system in itself. And there's so many factors that go into people's decisions. So, for example, let's think about the CGM and the insulin pump. So a teenager with diabetes, they might wear the insulin pump because they don't have to carry needles around with them, but why would they want to wear a stigmatizing CGM on their arm when they want to wear a sleeveless shirt to school? So that is, even though you have a wonderful technology that's been optimized for human use, you have a teenager. Does anybody have teenagers, by the way? Okay, so I thought I would get a laugh out of that, but I had 3 girls, so that is the number one confounder, is human behavior. So in addition to patients who are using these technologies, we also have the healthcare workers who have to use technologies. They're also a barrier to successful use. We also have administrators of healthcare organizations that have to make decisions about budgets. We have policymakers that also are that's a huge influence on what we can do as a healthcare system to help care for our patients. And then the other huge influence for us as healthcare systems are payers. And as an individual patient, my daughter was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when she was 7, and the insulin pump was relatively new. And I had an insurance company deny the claim for the insulin pump, saying it was investigative. I said, "Oh, you don't know who you're messing with. I'm going to get that. I'm going to get that solved." So as Mona said, the challenges that I see, or the opportunities to make applications of computing in healthcare more successful, is everything Mona said, like with regard to health data sharing. We have to respect the privacy, and how these data are used is very important to me, for example, and representative data sets. So if we're just looking at electronic health record data, we're only looking at people that access healthcare. So that's missing a chunk of people. And then there's all the stuff that humans are made of, so that are worthy of study. Trust is huge for precision medicine. My health system is just about to launch a precision medicine platform where people are going to be donating their genome and their electronic health record to a company, all with the promise of getting back some information about themselves. But are they really aware of what they're giving up? And that having that trust is really important. So that's my bottom line. Humans, we need to understand them.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you, Tammy. So I'm going to ask for some grace from the audience. As a government drone, PowerPoint is my religion, and I don't have any slides today, so please bear with me. So it's great to be here. I've been, working with the computing consortium here for a few years, and my first interaction was at a sort of healthcare and computing in the future workshop from maybe 2022. And so it's been great to see sort of this community continue to come together around the challenges within healthcare. I work at ARPA-H, and at ARPA-H, much like DARPA or IARPA or ARPA-E, our goal is to really go after transformative change for our topic, which is health outcomes. I think what's been interesting in our early history as an agency is that when you look at these health moonshots, which we want to invest in, they almost all require super abilities to get to the outcomes that we're looking for, right? So going back to some of the discussions from earlier today, computing is integrated completely in all of our program activities, right? Because if we're really going after these incredibly challenging moonshot concepts, which require not only technology development, but things like influencing and understanding the policy landscapes around delivery, the payer and payee networks and relationships, it really requires the ability to look orthogonally, and computation really helps us do that. So my portfolio is really focused, like I mentioned, on using computational tools to make biomedical research and development more predictive. So there are like two curves that keep me and my team up at night. The first curve is from a really great Congressional Budget Office document from a few years ago that looked back over the history of the U.S. pharmaceutical sector and the FDA's role in all of that. And what they demonstrated is that the pharmaceutical sector here in the U.S. invests more as a percentage of R&D than almost any other industry here in this country. Yet, when we look at throughput of approved therapies that our country has access to, it's remained flat for 50 to 75 years. So despite investing more money over time, and despite the promise of all of these enabling technologies in biotech and the computer science world, we haven't translated those things into impact for patients. And so we run two programs that are aiming to address that. One program is focused on novel computational protein design tools that are really focused on our immune system and the interaction of novel de novo biologics to influence disease. So really thinking about leveraging some of the AI advances with more mechanistic and physics-based models to understand protein-protein interactions and dynamics within our immune system. We have a second program that's focused on replacing animal models in preclinical research. So one of the challenges that we have that were alluded to earlier today in computational models is that, we try to model human physiology with in vitro, things in a dish, petri dish, with animal models, but also in silico methodologies. And what we've, determined over time is that when you look at drugs that enter the market, over 90% of the drugs that reach clinical trial status fail to make it to license, right? So those predictive tools and those models that we use as surrogate for humans, they don't work. And yet we've been really using a similar toolkit for a long time. And so that program is really designed to think about regulated experiments that predict safety outcomes for pharmaceuticals and bring the computational tools to the forefront of how we're doing our preclinical experimentation. So there are these enormous opportunities in this space, but much like we were discussing, we're in the age of AI right now. In the biotech and sort of pharma world, there's this thought that we're in the living age, right? We're in the ability to manipulate life and to extend health span and lifespan and really think very creatively about our use of biology, especially for things like medicine. But in terms of translating those things into patient impact, right, it's very clear from the metrics that we have all seen that that has not occurred. And it's unclear that that's going to occur in the near future without all of us thinking collectively about how to use the advances in things like artificial intelligence and machine learning with pair those with some of the advances that we've made in wet lab experimentation for biology. So it's been an interesting time at ARPA-H's early history in our 3 years of existence. And what I'm really excited about is not only the intersection of the discoveries and tools that we've discussed here today, but the ability for these interdisciplinary teams to come together around some of these health challenges. Unlike, like a DARPA or an RPE, our model allows for us to have direct patient impact, right? It's not hypothetical national security concerns. It's not things that in the energy sector that might be forecasted, years or decades into the future. If we're successful, we'll be able to turn health outcomes around immediately. And so I'd love for this community, as a lot of computational experts, to really think about some of the challenges that we all brought up here in health. We've got systems integration challenges. We have data challenges. We have challenges around the models that we're developing. And if a language model or maybe a biology model is the most appropriate thing to apply against some of these real health challenges that have been intractable so far. So I'm really excited to be a part of this panel and to be here today with all of you. The best part about my job is I get to go out and find brilliant people to work with out in academia and industry. And so I'm excited to have discussions throughout the day about how we can enable that.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Thank the panel. So I'd really like to thank our panelists for really helping us understand the transformative potential of computing in healthcare, as well as the impact of past research, and for highlighting some of the areas where research could really help. I'm sure a lot of research went into, Tammy, into miniaturizing the glucose monitoring, continuous glucose monitoring. Lots of computer science went into that. Now, how can we look forward and what are the opportunities for research to address some of these challenges like the ones that Andy was mentioning?
I would really encourage everybody in this room to go through the government relations training for working with politicians and talking to politicians about what you do. So Brian Mosley heads that up for the CRA, and he's out if you haven't done it. Yes, well, I don't know where he is. But I think that we need to learn how to talk to people who are making decisions. It's part of my job because I work in a health system, and I have a big team of people that are expensive. And so I have to be able to communicate to health administrators who might not understand why we're there. And I think that is what y'all need to learn too. You have to understand that there's lots of competing priorities, and you have to be able to articulate why the work that you're doing is so important, because it is. It's saving lives, and it's foundational. And I think Beth Minon is talking tomorrow about the, I always say it wrong, the tire tracks document, but that's a really effective tool to show how this, what I would say, basic computing research what it has translated into. So for type 1 diabetes, we're going to have an artificial pancreas eventually between the CGM and an AI running in the insulin pump. That's only because of you guys, and that's going to save lives, and that's amazing. But being able to say that story to a politician that's making that decision, maybe they have somebody affected by that disease, So I actually think health is a really good way of positioning your work.
Do any of you have questions for your fellow panelists?
I've actually got a question maybe for Susan. One of the challenges that comes up in all of our sort of data lakes and environments and things like that is PHI, PII. I've worked in the, health as well as national security community for a while. And so, maybe it's analogous to like information classification. We use this maybe as an excuse, as instead of a problem to tackle across the ecosystem. Does NIH have any efforts or initiatives to think differently about how we classify health data?
Oh, that's such a great question, because part of this is wrapped up into the world of policy. So I'll give you a great example of where we're struggling, which I can see Tammy is actually going to make some progress, and that is because of our policy and how we can share genomic data that we collect from our clinical studies and our trials. It cannot be linked with electronic healthcare data. That is a policy that we have. So there's a great challenge there, and we've been trying in different ways to overcome this, and I can speak about that in terms of homomorphic encryption and other sort of federated learning and computing, some synthetic data for the EHRs. But that's still a policy that we have to overcome. So these are real challenges that can utilize advances in computer science and in these types of ways to compute. But what we would really like to do is to do exactly what Tammy is doing, because that's really where you can get into the personalized medicine. And just reading a paper recently that folks are now taking genetics of particular glioblastoma cells and the genetics of these cells from individual people, and then doing drug panels on those cells and finding out which are the top drugs that they can now give to those patients, and doing this in a clinical trial. And that's something that we could be doing, but we could also be collecting that data and using it for the future. So there's just so much that we can do. But you're right, Andy, we stand at the barrier of our own best intentions when it comes to PII and PHI. And sometimes it's the innovative people outside the box who are going to actually help us solve that problem.
Thanks. Anyone else want to ask a question of each other?
I'm going to ask a question of Mona, because I know she cares about this. How do you ensure that the data sets you're working on are representative? I know that you care about that. Is there something, a strategy that you've used?
Well, honestly, we can't ensure that the data that we can't ensure that it's representative, because it's not. We're given the data that we're using. But what we can do when we develop methods is think about not just improving performance on all the data together, which is how often people in machine learning kind of think. Like, you want to get your ROC or whatever higher, but instead we need to think about stratified performance. We need to think about how things work across different population groups. So I think we need to pay more attention to those kinds of questions while we're evaluating what we did. And instead of always chasing getting that epsilon better improvement, think, is my method working, let's say, equitably across populations? And so we certainly spend a lot of time thinking about that.
And Mona, you're probably deeply aware of this, but just for the audience, I do know that there's an open source toolkit. It has some technology. It's open source. It also has some technology that people at Microsoft Research developed, Meridic and others, to do the stratified analysis when you have once you stratify, you often have very small buckets of data about particular intersections of all the attributes. And so they've done some work to try to it's statistical work to make that work better. In any case, the package is called FairLearn. It's on GitHub. So anyway, any other questions people want to ask of each other? Thank you for that, Mona.
I have a question. It could be for anyone on the panel. And this is something that in the last year and a half, I've been working very deeply with healthcare institutions and computer scientists and AI experts. And so in our healthcare system, for better or for worse, it's a competitive market. So even if you're going to a hospital or clinic that has Epic, I guarantee you that your Epic healthcare system at your hospital is completely different from your cousin who lives in a different city and is at a different hospital, but using the same sort of Epic system. And so that creates a really interesting challenge in terms of large data. You just have this cacophony of non-compatible data that we're constantly trying to harmonize in creative ways and map it to data models that researchers like. In my field, it's mostly OMAP, but there's a lot of other data models too. And that mapping is lossy, and the data is incomplete, and there's often silly mistakes that we can't capture. I would love to know if you're thinking about, or if you have some strategies about how we can deal with the fact that we just live in this seemingly unharmonizable situation, and where you might be thinking of going in terms of this, and love to open that up.
Well, I think Andy and I were on a panel or a meeting that CCC ran a couple of years ago, and we thought about this a little bit. And so one kind of thought was the role that it's a little bit like translation, right? So translating between different hospitals, and what role machine translation or even programming languages can play in kind of moving that forward. I think it's an extremely challenging and imperfect kind of world, but I do think there's an opportunity to bring in a whole branch of computer science that hasn't been brought into this area traditionally.
Yeah, so one of our challenges at ARPA-H is the capabilities we invest in because of our healthcare ecosystem have to be commercializable at the end of our investment. And so, we're always thinking about what's the form factor that's going to be able to be created, within a company environment after we're done. how can we help investigators go and think about, creating a commercial capability for the tools that they build? And this area is one of those, right? Healthcare system interconnectivity, resilience during cyber events, public health emergencies and things like that. I think what we've seen over time is that if those capabilities are not configured in peacetime to make a hospital system money, it's going to be very difficult for those things to be maintained so they're available when you need them. And so I think through that lens, how can we work with and understand in the nonprofit and for-profit healthcare delivery ecosystem where those pain points are that we can build capabilities that are going to allow for that data exchange and accessibility to happen. But that also we can point towards, system improvements in terms of, patient throughput or bed capacity, areas that are going to allow for us to commercialize those, information systems, but then also provide some resilience and capability to learn from all of the healthcare that happens in those systems.
Wonderful. Love to see that advance a little more, because that is a sticking point for you wanting to get those large data sets to train. And this is happening in the UK because they have a more harmonized system and they're training on, 1.5 million people or something. They just published this recently. So in that sense, I think other countries might be a little bit more advanced than we are in our capabilities to use this data.
Anyone else want to comment? If not, I will, but anyone want to go first? Okay. We will have time for audience questions. I'll tell you what, give me a flavor of how many audience questions are going to, how many of you want to put a hand up? Okay, maybe we should.
Sure, yeah, we can do that, yeah.
We have a lot. Okay, please take a seat, take a stand at one of the two mics, and I'll call in order based on that. And please try to keep your questions short, because we have now a lot of people waiting for questions, so we'd like to answer as many people as we can. All right. In the front.
Hi, I'm Spike Narayan, Executive Director for Engineering Research Visioning Alliance, an NSF-funded organization. So thank you for taking us through how AI is making its way through healthcare research. Very interesting. I also got the feeling that as you bring in more of these AI tools and start to use them, the human in the loop or human in the center seems to be a very key piece of what you do in healthcare. Given what we heard this morning about the advances in agentic AI, where the key is eliminating humans from the loop, what is your feeling on agentic AI and healthcare uses?
I can maybe go first on that. So I mentioned a few curves that keep my team up at night. So one of those curves is patients that we have here in the U.S. and providers that we have here in the U.S. And I think when you look at the trajectories of those curves, we have more patients, but we have less human providers. And so I think we need to be thinking about, from an agentic perspective, what can we turn over to these agents that will require a human on the loop, maybe, a human adjacent to the loop, right? Things that would typically burden a care provider's time. Because in some hospital systems, a doctor or an NP or a nurse is asked to see 30, 40 patients an hour. And it's clearly impossible to maintain, right, the best standard of care with that sort of throughput. So it's a great question. I think, yes, absolutely, we need those capabilities. And the nature of our healthcare ecosystem is kind of just in time. And so it would be good for us to think from a, community perspective, how we can figure out what those pain points are more efficiently, and then think about the acceptability and maybe adoptability challenges in some of those areas if we were to deploy like an AI agent.
I think adoption is a big barrier with AI, period, in healthcare when you're really getting to the nut of it. Most health systems in the country are not affiliated with the university, and so they don't have this kind of level of sophistication of understanding how to implement and adopt these technologies. I think that's the number one barrier. And then you have executives who are trying to make decisions about from this enormous sea of companies coming forward, and they don't have the acumen to really make that decision. And so I think those are two huge barriers that I see that are larger than the technical ones. But I think the technical ones are real as well. But
Back to the human in the loop part of the question, I just want to point out that one of the areas where some of the larger university-based healthcare systems have adopted AI is in answering is in pajama time. I'll put it that way for doctors and nurses, where they're answering emails that are separate from a visit, and one of the things that both the health systems I heard of, which was UCSD and UCSF, both of them. When they draft the note they draft the response to the patient. They use AI to draft the response for the patient, and then before allowing that, there's no button that just says send. The button says review and edit, or start over. And so that's their human in a loop approach to this. And apparently, to judge by the podcast that I listened to with Peter Lee, who runs health for Microsoft Research, that it's been very successful in those cases. But it is, as Tammy says, that's two very big major health systems that have universities associated with medical schools and so forth associated with the universities. So it's going to take a while for this stuff to percolate, I would imagine.
But I do think generative AI is really going to help reduce provider burden and burnout, which is real. I mean, as you said, we're having less providers than we have patients. So that's a great innovation.
I think you also mentioned formulaic applications like I'm sorry, the word is blanking for me. The prior authorization.
Oh yeah, prior authorization, absolutely. That's another really great use of. But also it's a double-edged sword, like all these things.
Yeah, it's early days. Let me go to the back and then come back to you. Okay.
Hi, thanks for this interesting conversation. Cade Crockford from the ACLU. I'm always struck in the conversation about electronic health records and research by the fact that people in this country usually don't mention why it's so difficult, and it's because we don't have a national health service. So, that would solve a lot of the problems pretty quickly if we did. I think it would also address a lot of the burnout that we're seeing from doctors who spend a lot of time dealing with insurance companies. But putting that to the side, question... Thank you. Question about something that I'm sure you're very humiliated to work for this person. RFK Jr. said yesterday, which is that the NIH is going to be replacing all animal testing with AI modeling. Is that actually happening? And if so, do you guys think it's a good idea? Thank you.
I can't.
Please don't put anybody on the spot.
My opinions, as a private citizen, I'm happy to give you, but up here, I'm going to say that I have heard that too. It has not happened yet, so it remains to be seen how that will be implemented. But I have also heard that from our leadership.
Good idea?
Well, we use robots in simulation labs. They're mannequins to train people on edge cases it's very useful technology. Go robotics people. Keep doing it.
So yeah, my comments are also in my personal capacity. But what we've shown over time is the animal models that we do employ don't effectively recapitulate human physiology for the purposes of things like drug safety or efficacy. And so, as a result, 90% of drugs that enter the clinic fail, and 75% of those failures are due to efficacy or safety. And so I think clearly we need to be thinking about introducing novel methodologies into our workflow, especially in preclinical environments.
Again, to quote from a doctor friend, if I had a dime for every time Alzheimer's has been cured in mice. Please.
Michaela Tao from Tennessee, Knoxville. I would like to add a dimension to the requirement for success, which is the need for a data fabric and the cyber infrastructure for the data. Susan, you were saying that we have ton of terabytes, or even you were actually not terabyte, even more. But if we look today at where the data are, yes, they are in the cloud, but there is a cost to take the data out. And community don't know where the data are, so we're missing catalog for searching the data. We are missing abstraction for understanding the data and metadata. So this is an opportunity for federal agency, university, labs, and industry to create that data fabric that is so needed. And I would like to see if you agree with me, disagree, or what can we do to make this happening? Thank you.
Oh, I'd love to answer this, and I don't think Chetan is here, Chetan Baru from NSF, but we've been partnering with NSF. Is he there? Yay! I'm going to give him a shout out. We've been partnering with Chetan and NSF for probably almost 2 years now. It's got the unfortunate name of the same name as ARPA-H, the fabric, the data fabric, and the Proto-OKN, the Proto-Open Knowledge Network. And I believe that this Uber knowledge network, and for me it's in health and biology, is actually trying to get to this place of findable, understandable, and knowledge generation of our data as a fabric infrastructure. And I'm really pleased to partner with NSF, and I'm also more pleased that my leadership is pleased to partner with NSF on this. And so now we did the first step, which is to fund the center at RTI and University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, I believe. And now we're moving towards bringing the second phase, which is bringing our knowledge graph generated data repositories into the fabric so that we can start to really push this out in a much more meaningful way. And I'd love to see if we can actually get to that vision. That would be, that would be wonderful. And I have to say that that's really the brainchild of Chetan. And when we were at NIDRD working together, and I think Yolanda Gill was here earlier. She was one of our early folks who really helped us formulate that plan. So I think we're in a good place.
Thank you.
Okay.
Jeremy Epstein, Georgia Tech Research Institute. In a prior life, I was leading a US-UK program for sharing pediatric cancer data in a privacy-preserving manner using differential privacy and other privacy-enhancing technologies. And that was kind of a narrow case, but I'm wondering more broadly, how much do you see privacy and AI as being in competition and preventing progress in one or the other, and how much do you see that they can work together cooperatively?
Wow, I think that's an amazing question. I mean, health data is super sensitive. We all want to keep our own health data and have control over it. Having said that, you can see that as, computer scientists really go where the data is. ImageNet was so important for what came next with neural networks. And wouldn't it be great if there was a way to have some part of health data, maybe not the most sensitive health data, available so that it didn't take all this energy just to get access to the data and how much innovation that would bring. It doesn't quite answer your question. So yes, we need those huge data sets to train these models, absolutely. But we have to respect, individuals' privacy when it comes to their health data. There's really no getting around it. Right? I do think we could think creatively about whether there are certain aspects of the data that we can release and have it in a form that's very standardized, so that the barrier to entry for computer scientists isn't as high as it is right now. Because I think if there were a lower barrier, more people would be able to come in, and maybe some, we'd get kind of expansive thinking and new approaches to tackle these important healthcare problems.
And I think one of the things that we do pretty poorly with an individual's health data is provide a return on what that data says from a health perspective. I presumably have an EHR somewhere. I don't know how to access it. I don't know how to use it. And I get very little real-time feedback on my health from the ecosystem. We willingly give our data away on a number of different things, from location to diet to Fitbit, but we get a return on that data, right? We get to use Google Maps, and we get to understand, how many steps we take and how we're sleeping at night. Things that if there was a unique model to provide an incentive for individuals to share their health data, right, to essentially return on that investment with meaningful, actionable health outcomes, that would be really interesting to look at. And, that won't, break down all of the privacy barriers, but it would provide some agency over your own health data, which I think this community has done a great job of doing that in other sectors. And it would be really interesting to see if there's alternative models we could think about for an EHR or my health data in terms of computational analysis that would benefit me in the long term.
Can I ask a really quick follow-up? I'm just curious, how many of you are familiar with the term differential privacy? Is this even a term that's in your space? No?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
I mean, I want to say something to follow up on what you had said. Tammy, did you want to say something? I was like, there are kind of two things that we could think about. One is like, how can we use EHR and genomic data and train big models on them to really advance like healthcare basics? And the second might be, I go into a doctor's office and I have my electronic health record, or it exists, I don't know where it is. Yeah. And that a doctor can now have access to all the electronic health records, kind of like doing a Google search, or that can kind of pick up patterns and see, how would I treat this person, even though I've never seen anybody who looks like this, some other doctors across the country or across the world have. And it's kind of two slightly different kind of problems that are both really important. But this privacy issue is something to be mindful of.
Yeah.
We're going to wrap up soon, so we're in a couple minutes, but I had one follow-on question to Jeremy's question. Anyone want to comment on the use of synthetic data or de-identified data? Are there any other possibilities other than asking people to give away their sensitive health data?
I think this goes to one of your questions about what people think is very easy to do. Is like, you've got this pile of data and it's easy.
Why don't we do that? Why don't we go to that one? Okay, we'll do a lightning round and keep that.
Well,
question. Start with you, Tammy.
I
the
think
question is, what is something people think is easy or take for granted, but is actually really a challenge that needs research attention? So we're going to go one at a time, and in the remaining 1.5 minutes. So go ahead, Tammy.
Yeah, I just think people assume that electronic health record data is very easy to use, but it's very messy. Human beings are entering it. Human beings are responding to questions in a clinical context, and sometimes they don't answer honestly. Just saying, people lie. And so it's not all as clear as you think it is. So and the privacy issue is real, and we're also missing a lot of people in that data, in electronic health record data.
Who would like to do the next answer to the question? Andy, you look like you would like to do it.
Yeah, so Tammy kind of stole mine, but I think maybe not exactly to the question, but I think one of the things that we heard a lot about earlier today were benchmarks and evaluations. In terms of health outcome efficacy of these computational tools that we're all building together, I think we lack a lot of those standards and metrics to evaluate success in a maybe synthetic environment before we deploy it into a clinical setting, for example. So I think we need some creativity around how we can do that better.
Oh, okay. So it's something that should be easy, but it's actually difficult. Well, I already made the case that, big data is really important for driving, advances in healthcare. But I'd like to say there's actually really hard to do interdisciplinary work in this space. And so it's not that an expert in AI can walk in and just transform medicine or understand things about how cells work, that it's really hard to do this interdisciplinary work. So people need to be trained for that too.
Great point. Yeah, and this comes a little bit from my experience over the past year, but in looking at deploying novel AI technologies in healthcare settings that will address some of these challenges and utilizing health data that's very different across different health industries, you think that it's going to be pretty easy to get that technology into the health system and work with people to do that. And it's not for lack of interest or desire on both the healthcare side and the researcher and small company side. It's all the legal hurdles that you have to go through. Unbelievable amount of people who have to touch and see and feel these technologies and be convinced before you can implement absolutely anything. And so if you really want to change the healthcare system, you have to sort of look at where the challenges are. And it's these non-technical things that are really the most challenging. And I can spend an enormous amount of days talking to the legal departments of almost every healthcare center. And it's unbelievable amount of meetings and discussions. And lowering that barrier would be really wonderful for the patients of the U.S.
Please join me in thanking the panel.